Teachers Union Naptosa has condemned an alleged racist incident that took place at Crawford International College in Pretoria. Now, this comes after a video went viral on social media of a substitute teacher at the school writing derogatory words on the classroom board referring to black people. Crawford International College has issued a statement confirming the incident did take place. It says the teacher implicated has now been dismissed. Let's continue getting a reaction from Naptosa. Its executive director is Basil Manuel, who joins us now via our video link. Great to have you on the program as always, sir. Thanks very much indeed for making time. I wonder if for context we can begin with what you know to have happened here.
Good morning, Ayanna. Thanks for having me. Of course, context is important. However, one has to look at all the things that were happening in the classroom at the time. Certainly, there seemed to be a lot of chaos. And of course, the children were reacting already to what was being written on the board, because so much had been written and utilizing derogatory terms to describe black people. Now, what makes it worse is that you're describing people different to yourself. And there can't be an assumption that you know how people feel about this, irrespective of whether you can try to justify it. But it's out of step with your lived reality, not the reality in your head. You know you can't go around saying and doing such things. You know that this is unacceptable the world over. And given the reality of those very children's parents and their grandparents, you cannot tell me that you are unaware of this. It screams about a lack of emotional intelligence.
Wow. Choice words there. So you're saying even if this was the context of, this happened in the context of a lesson, the teacher was what, tone deaf at best?
At best, because look at the reaction around you, Ayanna. And of course, you can put a thing in a particular context. However, you've got to be sensitive about the context too. And you have to make sure that your subjects, which are your children at this stage, are aware of what you are trying to illustrate. It didn't appear as though these children were aware that this was an illustration for a particular purpose other than offending them. And that is what worried me.
Yeah.
But let's also acknowledge the quick reaction of the school, etc., which is important. But it does show us that in every community, in all of society, there are still lurking hundreds of people who still believe in a world that they don't even see around them any longer.
Yeah. And perhaps, Basil, this is a teaching moment, right? Excuse the pun. Because something ought to be said, I guess, even an academic discussion about how we can go about teaching the meaning of derogatory words in the context of a classroom, especially when optics matter, which is, I think, the point that you're making.
Yes. There are two things that I see as lessons. The one is exactly what you have just mentioned. But in addition to that, the other is taking time out, whether it's once a year, once in 6 months, particularly when all schools have become very integrated, to talk about the things that are acceptable and not acceptable, whether it be in a staff room, whether it be on the playground, etc. Because we start alerting people on all sides of the divide to what some people see as acceptable, what other people see the very same thing to be as majorly offensive. And in that way, we start educating better. Because some people will claim, inevitably, that it was in all innocence. And I said this not knowing some people would take offense. What rubbish. Because you are not an island and you're not unaware of things, whether they be in the broader press or in society at large. So there are teachable moments here. It's regrettable that these youngsters had to be put through that themselves.
Yeah. Look, just to aid any viewer who's watching and didn't necessarily catch sight of that video, the words written on the board were the K and the N word. And I needed to also make a decision about whether or not I share this kind of information in case, anyway, I think the point is well made. My question, though, is what is then the advice to teachers about how to teach the meaning of those words? Because we can't also ignore the historical significance of the words themselves, lest children use them without that context to cause insult to other people unknowingly.
Absolutely, and we must remember there's literature, and literature was time-bound, and some of these words would appear in literature, and that gives a beautiful teaching moment about things that offend us, and how do you feel about words like this? And children will tell you, because even our youngsters who haven't lived through apartheid have been labeled. And they've seen it, or they have felt the different treatment. So there are methods of doing that sensitively. And also, because it teaches you, who may not be in that particular situation like this particular lady, it will give her an insight into exactly how others feel. So we mustn't pretend that they're not there. But we must know the context in which we use them, how we use them, how we extract the input from the children to make the teaching more acceptable.
Yeah. And I wonder what the best way to go about that you reckon is. I mean, for instance, the question I have is, should teachers who look like the lady in that video, is there room to have a discussion about them not even going there? Because there are people among us who think that even just having her teach that lesson is just completely unacceptable, whereas there's other individuals who reckon that she's just doing her job and there's a task at hand here that she needs to fulfill. I wonder where you stand on that spectrum.
I agree with the latter, but it's all about how you do it. Some people can say the most offensive thing in such a way that you actually look forward to this. And that is not necessarily the intention. However, some people can say things that offend immediately because of how it's done. And you know yourself. That's the first point. You know whether you have enough within you to even touch on something that sensitive. Yeah. And what I'm saying is that you can't take away the job of the teacher because of skin color or something like that. You're going to have to traverse these difficulties in some way or the other. But that is when you put up your hand and you ask for help, if you yourself is uncertain.
Sure. Now, of course, an incident like this is so grotesque that it makes it to the news, and I think sometimes we run the risk of creating the perception that this is genuinely what happens in classrooms. But I wonder what your take is about whether or not we're getting better at, navigating these tricky waters, these troubled waters sometimes.
Speaking generally and then specifically about classrooms, I think we have seen in society at large how incidents like this have diminished greatly over time. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't harbor certain sentiments. It means that they have become more adept at how they express them. And I think because teachers and teaching and schools are just parts of the broader society, then I think it's the same. And it is a great pity that we would have people in our number that still harbor these sentiments, but it would be foolhardy to think that they aren't. And that is why we've got to be alert to this all the time. And we've got to talk openly about race issues. We mustn't pretend they don't exist. Even though the world looks ideal, we know that sometimes we've airbrushed the world.
Absolutely. There's plenty to think about. Basil Manuel, thanks for giving us your insights this Wednesday morning. Appreciate your time. Basil Manuel is Naptosa's Executive Director. Thanks once again indeed.